Makati high-rise, Kapre. The smoke from the 13th floor smelled like cigar and something burnt, like flesh left too long in the sun. I wiped the grit from my eyes and spat a thick glob of phlegm onto the dusty concrete. It was late, past the time the supervisors usually ordered us to pack up our tools, but we were behind schedule on the skeletal frame of the Makati high-rise. The skeleton of the building rose like a jagged tooth against the skyline. I looked over at Ramon. He was sitting on a pile of rebar, his face shadowed by his hard hat. He was staring up at the floor above us. "You smell that?" Ramon asked. His voice was raspy from years of inhaling dust and lime. I inhaled deep. It wasn't the usual smell of wet cement and grinding metal. It was heavy, thick. It tasted like old tobacco leaves and something rotting, something organic that had been scorched until it lost its moisture. "It's just the construction," I said, though I didn't believe it. Ramon didn't move. He just pointed his chin upward toward the 13th floor. The floor the architects tried to hide by skipping the number in the official blueprints, but we all knew it was there. We called it the unlucky floor. "It's not construction," he whispered. "It's a guest." I laughed, but the sound felt hollow in my throat. He was just trying to spook me. Construction workers have a habit of making up stories to pass the time during the long shifts under the Manila sun. They talk about Encanto, about spirits that inhabit the land before the steel and glass arrived. The next day, it started with Mang Nicasio. Nicasio was a sturdy man, a veteran of 3 different projects in the CBD. He was hauling a crate of fasteners toward the elevator hoist when he stopped dead in his tracks. He stood on the edge of the concrete slab, staring at the 13th floor. He didn't scream. He didn't fall. He just stayed there, perfectly still, as if he had become part of the architecture. By the time I reached him, his eyes were wide and glazed. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking up at a plume of gray smoke that drifted lazily from the balcony of the floor above. Then he just stepped back into the shadows of the stairwell. When I followed him in, the space was empty. No Nicasio. No tools, just a lingering smell of burnt hair and tobacco. I told the foreman, Hilario, about it. Hilario was a man of few words who preferred his whiskey to conversation. He just stared at me over his spectacles. "Someone probably just tripped and fell into the lower levels," Hilario said, or he walked off to find some water. "Don't go looking for him. Just finish the pour." But I saw the way Hilario's hands shook when he held his clipboard. He knew. 2 days later, it was Pascal's turn. Pascal was a joker, always cracking jokes about the girls in the nearby office buildings. He disappeared during the lunch break. We found his hard hat sitting on a pile of bricks near the 13th floor transition. It was still dusty from his forehead. When we searched the area, we found nothing but a scorched piece of fabrica scrap of his orange high-visibility vest that looked like it had been chewed by something with very large teeth. The site became quiet. The workers started whispering among themselves. They stopped looking at the 13th floor, but they also stopped talking to each other. Every time a worker grew too loud or stayed in one spot for too long, the others would move away. The smoke was getting thicker. It wasn't just drifting anymore. It seemed to linger in the rafters, clinging to the girders like a heavy fog. I spent my nights thinking about the land. Before the skyscrapers, before the malls, what was here? I heard the old-timers talk about the balete trees that used to dominate the plains of what is now prime real estate. They said these trees were ancient, and anything that lived in them had a right to stay. On the 5th night, I stayed late again. I had a personal grudge against the construction I wanted to finish so I could get my completion bonus and take my wife to the province. The moon was a sliver of silver over the Makati skyline. The city hummed in the distance, a low vibration of engines and distant voices. But here, on the unfinished skeleton, the silence was heavy. I heard a sound. It wasn't the wind. It was a low, rhythmic thrum. Stump, stump, like a heavy footfall hitting the concrete above me. I looked up. The 13th floor was shrouded in a haze of gray smoke. It didn't rise from a chimney or a vent. It seemed to bleed out from the very pores of the concrete. Then came the smell. It wasn't just burnt hair anymore. It was the overwhelming, cloying scent of ancient wood and fermented tobacco. It made my eyes water. I took a step toward the stairs. My legs felt heavy like I was walking through molasses. "Who's there?" I called out. My voice cracked. The sound that came back wasn't a human voice. It was a low rumble, like a boulder rolling down a hill of gravel. It vibrated in my chest cavity. Hey, Yuna. A shadow moved above me. It wasn't a man-sized shadow. It was massive, hunched, and wide. It moved with a strange, fluid grace that didn't belong to a human frame. It gripped the edge of the railing on the 13th floor. The middle groaned under its weight. I watched as a hand. No, it wasn't a hand gripped the rail. It was thick, the skin the color of dark mahogany, covered in hair like coarse wire. The fingers were long, ending in blunt, powerful tips. The figure leaned over the edge. I couldn't see its face clearly, only the silhouette against the hazy gray smoke, but I saw the glow. A small, orange ember burned in the darkness of its mouth, a cigar the size of a forearm. A thick cloud of smoke billed 10 ed out, and for a second, the shake of a face formed in the haze. It wasn't a human face. It was too large, the features stretched and elongated, with eyes that didn't reflect light but seemed to swallow it instead. I should have run. I should have dropped my tools and sprinted toward the gate, but my feet were rooted. I watched as the entity took a long drag of its cigar, the ember glowing fiercely. The sound of something heavy being dragged across the concrete above me echoed in the hollow space of the building. Scrape, thud, scrape. It sounded like a body. I looked up again, my neck straining. The shadow moved closer to the edge. It wasn't just a spirit, it was a tenant. It had claimed this space. The skyscraper wasn't a building to it. It was just another branch of the tree it had once guarded. I saw a movement on the floor above. A man, it was Tomas, the welder who had gone missing 3 days ago, was being dragged toward the edge. He wasn't screaming. He looked limp, his body hanging like a sack of grain. The massive figure held him by the waist. The grip was so firm that the fabric of Tomas's shirt tore with a sound like a gunshot. Then the entity paused. It turned its head toward me. The eyes, those bottomless, dark pits, found mine. I felt a physical weight press against my skull, a psychic pressure that made my ears ring. It wasn't anger I felt. It was something much worse. It was indifference. To this thing, I wasn't an enemy. I was an insect that had crawled into its garden. The figure let out a low, vibrating chuckle that shook the dust off the nearby beams. It lifted Tomas toward the 13th floor. The man's head lolled back, his eyes rolling into his head. As the body crossed the threshold of the upper floor, the sound of his hitting the ground was muffled by the thick, heavy smoke. I didn't wait. I turned and ran. I didn't stop until I reached the ground gate. I sat on the curb, gasping for air, my lungs burning from the lingering taste of burnt tobacco. My hands shook so violently I couldn't light a cigarette. The next morning, Hilario came to me. He looked older, his face lined with exhaustion. They found some of the others, he said softly. They found them in the foundation of the basement. They didn't have any marks on them. They just looked like they had fallen asleep and never woken up. I didn't tell him about the 13th floor. I didn't tell him about the man with the cigar. A month later, the construction company halted the project. The investors pulled out. They said it was due to structural irregularities and unforeseen geological issues. But I know what they found. They tried to dig deeper into the foundation. They hit something solid, something that didn't belong in the city soil. They found a root. Not a normal tree root, but a massive, gnarled mass of wood that stretched deep into the earth, thick as a subway tunnel. It was the stump of a balete tree that had stood for centuries before the first brick was laid. They tried to cut it, but the saws shattered against it like they were hitting diamond. The site is abandoned now. The grass is growing through the cracks in the concrete. The fence is rusted. But every time I drive past the site at night, I see it. The 13th floor. The lights are off, but the smoke still rises. It doesn't matter how many stories they build or how much steel they pour. You can't build over something that has been there since the beginning of time. You can only invite it to live in your house. I stood before the fence last night, a bottle of beer in my hand. I looked up at the skeletal silhouette of the tower. From the 13th floor, a single glowing ember flickered like a distant star. A thick cloud of smoke drifted out into the night air, smelling of old wood and scorched meat. I saw the shadow move behind the railing. It wasn't just one of them anymore. There were others now, huddled in the gray haze of the upper floor, waiting for the next worker to wander too close to the height. The smoke didn't smell like a fire. It smelled like a home. I looked at the stump of the tree's spirit, and I realized that the building wasn't standing on the ground. It was growing out of the rot. The shadow moved again, and this time it stepped toward the edge of the balcony, the ember of its cigar casting a long, flickering light across the face of the building. I saw a hand grip the railing, a hand that was far too large to be human, and I realized that the only reason I was still alive was because I hadn't been invited to join the feast yet. I looked at the 13th floor one last time before turning away. In the very top window, where the glass had never been installed, the face appeared in the smoke, a face with eyes that didn't blink, watching me walk away, waiting for the next person who would dare to climb too high. The smoke from the 13th floor is still there, and if you listen closely on a quiet night, you can hear the sound of something heavy being dragged across the rafters. Is it just a building, or is it a cage?